Okay, it's kind of ironic I'm starting the video off with a smile, but at the same stage I know that I'm going to be disappointing or disheartening some people in doing that. I've had numerous comments over the last couple of videos from people saying that when I sigh at the beginning of a video, that's a good sign for them that it's going to be a good one. On this occasion, I'm afraid I can't quite rouse a sigh, because what I want to talk about is religiosity in the UK, some of the data, the latest data from the National Centre of Social Research, which brings out the British Social Attitude Survey on an annual basis, and the trends are broadly positive from my perspective, so it's kind of hard to rouse a sigh. That is not to say that there won't be a few bees in my bonnet as the video goes on, because what I want to talk about is what seems to be an inexorable rise in religiosity within the United Kingdom, tempered only, I think, largely by immigration, and the precipice that the Church of England, Anglican Communion, is heading over the next couple of generations, seemingly, according to the data, and with the special status that the Church of England has with regard to the head of state, with regard to the legislature, and with regard to state-funded schools. These are quite big issues, and that's something that I want to talk about a little bit later in the video. So I think perhaps the first thing that I should do, I've got the old green screen on, so I can put data up here. But you know what I look like by now. You know how fucking ugly I am, so you don't need to be staring at my face. I tell you what I do, I'll splash it over the screen is what I will do. So let me show you the first little pocket of data that they've put out. This is data that they're preparing for the next British Social Attitude Survey, and they tend to release it in they drip feed some of this stuff out as little teasers over the course of the year. This is data that was collated last year. Okay, so this will effectively be data from 2016, and this is an interesting question. They ask, do you regard yourself as belonging to any particular religion? If yes, which? Now, they ask the same question every year since 1983. So we've got a bank of 33 years data here. So that makes it quite exciting. This is the same thing that the census does. The census asks the same question every 10 years about people's religion. The results that they get in the British Social Attitude Survey is quite different from the results that they get in the census, and I think that's worth discussing before I mention any of this data, because you may see data for the United Kingdom that looks quite different from this, and if you do, and it's showing much higher levels of religiosity, that's data that's coming from the census. And if anybody is using that data to try and suggest that British people are more religious than they actually are, then they are misusing that data. And that's not just me saying that, that's the Office of National Statistics that produces the census that says the same thing. They acknowledge that the census is not attempting to unearth people's religious beliefs or religious conviction. What it wants to know is effectively their cultural allegiance. So if you regard yourself as culturally a Christian or culturally a Jew, etc., etc., then that's what they're really interested in, and they accept that in many ways it overportrays the level of religiosity, and that sometimes gets misused. But it's not them that's misusing it. And the reason that occurs in the census is because not just of the way the question's worded, but where the question is asked within the census, and it's asked after a previous set of questions about cultural allegiance and society. So it puts people in that mindset. They are aware of that. But they maintain the question in that way because it maintains some consistency from census to census, and is also the kind of data that local authorities are interested in. I have no issue with that. But in terms of knowing about people's religion, the British Social Attitude Survey is a much better survey, even though it has a much smaller number of people from which it's drawing from in terms of its sampling. So what we can see is there's really been two big movers in all of this over the years of the data you're looking at. We're looking at the Church of England, which started off at a pretty rude and healthy 40% of the population, and that has gone down to 15%. No religion has gone from 31% up to 53%, the highest that it has ever been. Now, the British Religion in Numbers website has produced a little graph for this. There's no point me reinventing the wheel. This is their graph up to 2015. If I put the 2017 figures on for Anglicans and no religion, you kind of see where we're heading. And we've got a sort of trend, a couple of trend lines that are moving in different directions. You can see that Roman Catholics, you can see that other Christians, that's other Christian groups other than Anglicans and Roman Catholics and non-Christian religions they're pretty stable, with the non-Christians growing somewhat, and that is mainly due to immigration, because almost all immigrants arrive in this country with a religion, and the vast majority of those are not Anglican, simply by dint of the countries that they are coming from. So that pretty much accounts for the stability in those numbers, rather than the incumbent Christian population gradually losing their religion. Now, one of the most interesting charts with regard to this, and this builds on something that I've shown in the past, in actual fact, is when we start looking at those by age groups. And this is the data we have, and they've subdivided it into 1986, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2015, 2016, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is the interesting thing with regard to this, is that we've always had this trend, which is the younger the age group, the more likely they are to be religious. Religiosity increases with older age group, and so the question is, do people just get more religious as they get older, or are people carrying their levels of religiosity or irreligiosity throughout their life? So what I've done is I've compiled a little chart here, and this is very much in line with a chart that the British Social Attitude Survey showed themselves, and I think the 2010 survey, which showed that effectively cohorts are carrying their level of religiosity throughout their life. You can see the 1824 doesn't quite port across into the 45 to 54. It would have to be 48 to 54 or 15 to 24 for that to happen. But you're looking at 55 going to 56, 48 going to 50, 34 going to 40, which is the only anomalous one there with a 6% change, and 26 going to 27. So it generally remains pretty much the same. I think that's kind of an enlightening statistic for people in other societies, maybe such as the United States, that have much higher levels of religiosity, and then considering where your efforts are aimed, right? You know, how many people lose their religion? And what I would suggest is that in actual fact, it's probably true as a general human sort of artifact of the human condition. I mean, you can't tell within that data how many people are losing their religion, but what you can say is that pretty much however many people are losing their religion, people are gaining a religion at about the same rate. And so I would suggest, if you're in a country with more religiosity, really the change that you're going to see is a generational change. It's as more religious people are dying of old age and less religious generations are coming through, rather than people losing their religion along the way. That's certainly been the experience in the United Kingdom since 1983. Going back to this year's data, there's some really interesting pieces of data here. Let me show you this. And I think what's most interesting when you compare the data here by religious affiliation by age 2016, look at the 18 to 24 category and the Church of England / Anglican communion. Only 3% of individuals in that age group affiliate with the Church of England, affiliate with the state religion of the United Kingdom. And bear that figure, that 3% figure, in mind when I start talking about state-funded faith schools, Church of England schools in a few minutes. But before I do that, I just want to have a little look at an article that was in the Independent, right? Because a lot of the newspapers ran articles on some of this data, and I found the one in the Independent probably the most interesting. So let's have a little look at that. And so here it is, the article in the Independent. Record numbers of British people say they have no religion. News prompt fresh calls for government to cut amount of public money going to the church and reduce its influence in society. So I do want to discuss this influence in society. One of them linked to one of the things they picked up on in this Independent article. But before I do that, what I wanted to read out was just this little bit that was in here. A quote from the Right Reverend Paul Bayes, Bishop of Liverpool. And he said this. He said, in this modern world, people are more willing to be honest and say they have no religion rather than casually saying they are Church of England. Okay, which I think is probably right, actually. And that's a very valid, insightful point that he's made there. This honesty, he goes on to say, this honesty is welcome. Of course, the latest BSA figures bring a continuing challenge to the churches to speak clearly of our faith into a sceptical and plural world. Now, this is the bit that I found really interesting. But saying no religion is not the same as a considered atheism, I would add to that, or an unconsidered atheism. People's minds and hearts remain open. Okay, so I take on board what the Right Reverend Paul Bayes says with regard to that. He's absolutely right in what he says, that just because you say you don't have a religion doesn't mean you don't believe in God. But there's another side to that coin. Another side that he doesn't bring on, which is just because you say you do have a religion doesn't mean that you do believe in God. And one of the reasons I say that is because I want to show you some statistics that I showed in a video a while ago, and it's one of the most remarkable statistics I think I've ever seen. One of the most shocking statistics when I saw it that I've ever seen in my life. And it was from a YouGov Times survey, 9th of February 2015. This was the survey, okay. And in this survey, they asked the question, first off, what is your religion? And in this particular survey, 42% said no religion, 49% said Christian, including Church of England, Catholic, Protestant, and all other Christian denominations. The total percentage of people that specified a religion was, what are we talking, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53. So, yeah, we've got 42%, 53%. And then we've got, I don't know, some fractions of percentages, the not sures and the what's, and the would rather not say is accounting for the rest. But this was a really interesting thing. They also asked the question, people have different beliefs about God. Which of the following best applies to you? I believe there is a God. Only 32% of the British population believe that there is a God. Right, but this was the staggering statistic was this. They showed you the statistics just for Christians, and only 55% of Christians believe in the United Kingdom believe there is a God. 45% of Christians in the United Kingdom don't believe in God, which, I mean, technically, to be a Christian, as I understand it, you don't actually have to believe in God historically. You have to accept Jesus Christ as the Jewish Messiah. He doesn't have to be the Son of God, technically, and I suppose technically there doesn't have to be a God. But given that he's died, I'm not sure by what mechanism he could enact the requirements of his messianic pretensions now after 2,000 years without a God. I have to say, if you were to put that question to those Christians, they would probably just look at you like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because pretty much for a lot of them, the only thing that they know about Christianity is that they regard themselves as a Christian. It's in that much of a parlous state. But I just wanted to say that this thing about, you know, well, just because you're not a Christian doesn't mean that you're not an atheist, that you don't lack of belief in God, it cuts both ways. Just because you identify as a Christian, even in the British Social Attitude Survey data, which tends to look at religiosity a bit better than the census, it still doesn't mean that you necessarily believe in God. Okay, so why is this really, really important? Because in the United Kingdom, we do not have a separation of church and state. Not that the separation of church and state seems to have helped the United States in too many regards, in terms of the impact of religion on day-to-day life compared to the United Kingdom. But there are some very specific anomalous things within the United Kingdom. Our head of state is required to be the head of the Church of England. That is a requirement. I'll talk about that in a minute. In our upper chamber, 26 of those spots are reserved for bishops within the Church of England. But the first thing that I want to talk about is faith schools, state-funded faith schools. I made a video on this a year or so ago. I want to make this clear from the outset, to not get into the miscommunication and misunderstanding that occurred there, because I had a lot of people, especially libertarians from the United States, saying, well, why can't, if the Church of England want to run a school, why the fuck shouldn't they be allowed to run a school and just have Christian pupils, etc., etc. What we're not talking about is the Church of England stumping up money to build and run a school and fund children going to that school, or the parents paying for their children's education in a school that is run by the Church of England. What we are talking about is something that would not be allowed in the United States because of the separation of church and state. We are talking here about state-funded schools, what in the United States would be called public schools. I can't call them public schools in the UK because that means things like Eton, Harrow, and the big schools like that are what we refer to as public schools, the most exclusive schools that are out there that you've got to pay for. These state-funded schools are what we are talking for. So the state is paying for the upkeep of these schools. The state is paying for the education, for the books, for the school meals, for everything else, paying for the teachers within the school. But these schools are run by the Roman Catholic Church. These schools are run by the Church of England and have a religious character, have mandatory acts of worship in the morning. Okay, so let me read you the piece that was on there in the Independent article, because it was really kind of interesting. Analysis of figures shows that for the first time, more people were being educated in state-funded Church of England schools, attending compulsory collective worship every day than attend Church of England churches each week. An average about 980,000 people attended church each week in 2014, the figures showed, down from the 1,009,100 initially calculated for 2013. Meanwhile, the Department of Education statistics showed that 1,027,584 children were enrolled at Church of England schools in 2014, surpassing the figure for weekly church attendance for the first time. It goes on to say just under 1 in 7, 16% of all school places in England are subject to religious admission criteria. Now, when I read that, I thought, is that just referring to state-funded schools, or is it now being a little bit misleading? And is it incorporating other schools which are not state-funded, which are private church schools? Okay, so I unearthed some more statistics on that, and that's 16%. That 1 in 7, just under 1 in 7 of all school places that have a religious admission criteria is just for state-funded schools. So consider the statistics that we have here, right? Just consider these statistics, okay? Let's go back to religious affiliation by age. And you can see the ways that trends are going. Every cohort is less religious than the one before. So it would be a bit of a turn up for the books, to put it mildly. If those between school ages, under the ages of 18, were more religious than the 18 to 24 category, okay, if we assume they are as religious as the 18 to 24 category and we tally up those figures, taking account, of course, for who's actually running these schools, because these schools, and I'll show you the data on screen, right? I'm not trying to hold anything back here. These schools are overwhelmingly run, almost entirely run, statistically speaking, by the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England. Okay, we've got a situation here. If we just tally up the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England, we've got 8% of pupils are going to affiliate with those religions. Even if we account other Christian denominations, that still takes us up to 22%. And yet, look at the statistics. It's particularly perverse in terms of primary schools. The Church of England alone runs more than 40% of primary schools in England. The Catholic Church runs around 15%. They account for almost 30% of primary school places are at faith schools, state-funded faith schools within the United Kingdom, and about 19% of places in secondary schools. That's for pupils aged 11 to 16. And of course, bear in mind that the majority of parents, they don't give it. The majority of religious parents who are Anglicans or are Roman Catholics aren't particularly bothered about sending their children to a Church of England or a Roman Catholic school. They just want to send their children to the school in their area, in their catchment area, that is either the closest or has the best academic performance. What is marvellous for them, of course, is that if the school that is in their area that has the best academic performance happens to have their religion associated with it, happy days as far as they're concerned. They have that extra choice, which is what makes a mockery of the government stance. And the government stance, the long-standing government stance, not just by the Conservative Party but by Labour governments as well, is that they're going to continue to allow these state-funded faith schools because it's what parents want. Fucking hell. Yes, of course it's what parents want, but which parents? Anglican parents and Roman Catholic parents. That's why. Because why wouldn't they want that extra choice? I'm sure if you asked Anglicans, would you like some extra NHS hospitals, NHS state-funded hospitals that are just for Anglicans, they'd say, well, yeah, actually, we will. I'm sure if you asked Roman Catholics, would you like us to pay for and open extra lanes on every motorway up and down the United Kingdom that are just for Catholics? So if when you're driving your car and the other lanes that are for everybody get a little bit too busy, you can have a lane that's just for Catholics, I'm sure they'd say, yeah, actually, we would rather like that. Of course they would. Who wouldn't like discrimination in their favour? Who wouldn't like extra schools that's just for them, that they can choose if they wish to use them for their son and daughter, but don't have to use them if they don't want to? What kind of an argument is that? But that's the argument that's used, and I think it's becoming increasingly untenable when you get down to statistics such as just 3% of 18 to 24-year-olds are associating with the Church of England, and the Church of England is being allowed to control and have a religious character and have daily acts of worship, mandatory daily acts of worship in 40% of primary schools. What they said in that independent article going on from that. So they just said just under 1 in 7, 16% of all school places in England are subject to religious admission criteria. And both Church of England research and independent polling have revealed that a large number of parents are forced to attend church simply to get their children into their local school. How absolutely fucked up is that as a situation? And bear in mind, as well as that taking place in larger towns and cities where there will be non-denominational schools alongside state-funded faith schools. There are also smaller towns within the United Kingdom where the only choice that is made available, remember, the state has a mandatory duty to provide education for every child up to 16, where the only option that the state is providing is a faith school, is a school with a religious character, either operated by the Church of England or the Roman Catholic Church. In those cases, they insist that those faith schools take on pupils not of that religion. But even so, what a fucked up situation to be in, where your only choice is to send your child to a school of a religion that you don't hold and the child doesn't hold either. And that is the only alternative that the state is providing. Responding to the latest figures, Humanists UK, a national charity working on behalf of non-religious people, said it was meaningless for the Church of England to remain the national, legally established church and to urge the government to end ever-increasing state funding for religion. Andrew Copson said, how can it be right that 97% of young people today are not Anglicans, but some 20% of the state schools to which their children go belong to the Church of England? Damn right that is the case. But that isn't the only issue we have. We also have some rather more constitutionally anomalous issues, I would say, that I do find somewhat objectionable. The first of these is what happens in the House of Lords. Now, many people have issues with the House of Lords on the grounds that, unlike most upper chambers in bicameral systems in Western democracies, people are not voted into the House of Lords. Do I think they should be? Yes, I think they should be. But we have a system of life peerages where the government issues these life peerages, and you tend to try, they are issued across party, right, especially amongst the three main political parties, so they're all represented in that upper chamber. Then you also have these crossbenchers that don't have party affiliations, and amongst those were two particular groups. We had the Law Lords and we had the Lords Spiritual. Now, the Law Lords have been disbanded because we had this situation which was recognised. We didn't have a Supreme Court in the United Kingdom, and talk about separation of powers of the executive and the legislature and the judiciary. You don't have a particular strong separation of powers in a parliamentary system, in that the executive is drawn from the legislature, of course, but you had this particular situation in the House of Commons with the Law Lords sat there, where you had the Law Lords were effectively the senior judiciary and the point of final recourse in the land, and they sat as part of the legislature. They had seats in the House of Lords. And even worse than that, in some ways, the office of Lord Chancellor was a member of the Cabinet and was the head of the Law Lords. So effectively, the head of the judiciary was also a member of the executive as well as being part of the legislature. We got rid of that. We saw sense in getting rid of that, in having a separate Supreme Court that was independent of the legislature, and not having this Lord Chancellor that's part of the Cabinet also being part of the judiciary. So that's the system that we got. We saw sense in that, but seemingly we didn't see sense in getting rid of the Lords Spiritual. And the Lords Spiritual are 26 Church of England bishops that get their places as part of our marvellous democracy in the United Kingdom in the upper chamber of the House of Lords by dint of being Church of England bishops. In other words, the Church of England is reserved 26 spots in our legislature. This doesn't apply to any other religion, and it doesn't apply to any other secular organisation. Now, maybe you could make some case for this when the Church of England, overwhelmingly people in the United Kingdom were Anglicans, but when you're getting down to a situation where only 15% of people in the United Kingdom associate themselves as Anglicans, this is a really, really strange thing. And what is interesting what is interesting actually, if you look at support, and I'll show you the statistics on screen for this state of affairs remaining, what you will find is that the majority of Christians think that this is an unreasonable state of affairs. In fact, Muslims are keener. Quite Machiavellian, really. They'd rather have, as Muslims traditionally do, they'd rather have people of the book than people such as myself of no religion. So even Christians are better than the likes of probably you watching this video or I. But even most Christians think this is a ridiculous state of affairs going forward. So that's the situation in the House of Lords, and yet it remains. Now, one thing that I will say is, again, I told you what the government's position is, that it's what people want with regard to faith schools, and roundly criticised that. Similarly, one of the government lines of successive governments has been that effectively the Lord's Spiritual provide a kind of moral, they're sort of moral and spiritual guides, ethical guides for the House of Lords. And do you know what? If we're going to have an unelected House of Lords, I can kind of see some basis for that. Why just have politicians, right? Why not draw from a bigger pool? But it isn't Church of England bishops that have a monopoly on ethics and morality. If what you want is people that can give ethical and moral guidance, why not have retired moral philosophers? Why not have people who are experts in medical ethics or featuring in the House of Lords and taking up some of these 26 seats? Why not have some scientists given these positions who can inform the other peers within the House of Lords about specific issues? If this is the approach you want to take, that we want this kind of expertise, then I'm all in favour of that. But bishops within the Church of England, come on, none of us hold this position anymore that they have a monopoly on ethical righteousness anymore. And in fact, we know how out of sync they are with society when it comes to issues such as homosexuality and gay marriage and things such as that. So how come we then make these statements, our government make these statements defending them as the moral and ethical guides to the rest of us, therefore justifying 26 places in the House of Lords? Absolutely unjustifiable, that. The last thing that I want to rant about, let's be honest with me, it usually is a rant, is the head of state. So we have a situation in the United Kingdom where our head of state is not elected. Our head of state is hereditary. And it surprised some people. I made a video a couple of years ago supporting the continued existence of the British monarchy, of having an hereditary head of state for the United Kingdom. Just for the United Kingdom. I didn't discuss other countries. And you know, in terms of the videos that I've made over the 9 years that I've been making videos on YouTube, that is one of the videos that I'm perhaps most proud of, because there's lots of other videos on that subject on YouTube, but I kind of feel like I've made a better case than any other case that I've seen there, including some arguments that I hadn't seen anywhere else, but which I think are very, very strong arguments, and arguments that require serious consideration, especially if you've not come across them before. So I invite you to watch that video if you're from the United Kingdom, in terms of maintaining the head of state such as we have, hereditary head of state, over changing to a republic. I also invite you, if you're not from the United Kingdom and you kind of wonder, well, why do you think you should keep that system when our system works so well for us, or when most other countries have abandoned it? But notwithstanding my position there, I do object to our head of state having to be the head of the Church of England. I know there'll be some people saying why would you be bothered about that, but not being bothered about the fact that you don't get to elect your head of state, and that's just inherited, as if it's so it shouldn't really matter. If you've got an inherited head of state, does it matter that they're head of the Church of England? And I would say yes, it does. And in some ways, this may seem a little bit perverse, I'll try and explain it, but it matters more. It seems even worse to me when you've got an inherited position than if you didn't. So let me try and explain why that seemingly perverse situation is how I view it. If we had, like most normal Western democracies, a democratically elected head of state, which is what I would go for if we had to start afresh, which we don't, right? If we had to start afresh, of course that's what I would go for. Of course I would. Okay, then imagine if you was to have a system where you said, right, we're having a democratically elected head of state, but to be elected, to apply, you have to be an Anglican, right? You have to say that you're a member of the Church of England specifically. Okay, because you're going to be the head of the Church of England when you take on the role. Now, would I find that objectionable? Yes, I would, because I think anybody ought to be able to apply for that position. But at least you know where you stand when you apply for the job. At least if you're not a member of the Church of England, at least if you don't regard yourself as an Anglican, you don't have to apply. There's not some kind of obligation put upon you to apply for that position. We have this kind of position now where we have Prince Charles, and then we have Prince William, and then I think we have Prince George, is it? Who are in line to take the throne. And they will grow up as individuals, and they ought to be able to make a decision on whether or not they believe in God, whether or not they're a Christian. They might want to take up another religion. They may decide that they're an atheist. And surely, as part of their human rights, they ought to be able to do that. And I think we're denying them their human rights when we put them in a situation where it's kind of expected that they will be head of state. Sure, they could decline to take the role, couldn't they? Right? But we kind of expect them to do it. It's an encumbrance on them anyway. But to say, no, you have to be a Christian, right? Or at least you have to pretend you believe. When you become head of state, right, you're expected to pretend to be a Christian, and you can't even let anything slip that might suggest that you're not, because what we're going to do is we're going to tie you down as an individual as the head of the Church of England, right? That can't be right. Surely we can move past that. There's no reason that we have to keep that. All the arguments that I made for keeping the monarchy, right, and all the arguments that I made for that, they all still stand. None of the perks that we have with the present system and the safeguards that we have depend upon our head of state being the head of the Church of England. We can easily lose that strand of it, and we've lost none of the benefits that we have with our present system. And I really think that we shouldn't wait to get into a situation where a Prince William or a Prince George let something slip that actually they're not an Anglican and maybe they don't believe in God, which of course would put the Church of England in a difficult position. In the head of the Church of England then wouldn't believe in God, which is disrespectful to the Church of England as well as the disrespectful to the rest of us. Getting into some pretty serious situations, I think, once we're getting down to the situation where only 15% of people within the United Kingdom are affiliated, regard themselves as members of the Church of England. Over 50% of people within the United Kingdom don't regard themselves as religious, and only 32% of people in the United Kingdom believe in God. To quote you a number of the statistics that I've shown you in this video, when we still have state-funded faith schools, when we still have bishops automatically given a position in part of our legislature, when we have a head of state that is head of the Church of England. This data is only going one way, right? You can see by the demographics of it and the fact that people do not become more religious as they get older, that regardless of what happens in the future, for the next few generations, it is already set in stone that the levels of religiosity in the United Kingdom are going to decline, because the people that are propping up those levels of religiosity are all going to die. It's time we started tackling some of these issues and stop making the kind of excuses that successive governments, both left and right wing, have made to maintain the status quo. Okay, thank you for watching this video. I hope you've got something out of it, even if you don't live in the United Kingdom. Bye for now.